Jack Miller didn't mean to look twice. He'd crossed that yard 1,000 times without flinching. Through drought years, through bad harvests, through the kind of silence that settles into a man's bones and stays there. But that evening, when he pushed open the barn door and held up his lantern, what he saw stopped him cold. A woman lay on her side in the straw, arms wrapped tight around 3 small children, her face pale as creekstone. She wasn't asleep. She was barely breathing. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. And don't you dare leave before the end. The summer of 1878 came down on Calla Ridge like a punishment. 3 months without rain. The creek bed behind Jack Miller's property had cracked open like old leather, and what little grass survived along the fence line had gone the color of ash. His cattle were thin. His well was dropping by the inch, and every morning he woke up to a sky so white and blazing it looked less like daylight and more like the world was burning slow from the outside in. Jack didn't have neighbors close enough to trouble him. That was the way he liked it. He was 34 years old and had lived alone on this 40-acre plot outside Calla Ridge for going on 6 years. People in town knew his name the way they knew the names of landmarks. The old church, the broken mill wheel, the Miller place out on Hartwell Road. You knew it was there. You didn't go out of your way to visit it. He'd made that easy enough. The night he found her, he'd been coming back from the far fence line where 2 of his posts had split clean through from the heat. He was sweaty and short-tempered and carrying a coil of wire over one shoulder when he noticed the barn door sitting a half-inch open. He hadn't left it that way. Jack set down the wire coil. He stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing moved. The cicadas were screaming in the dark brush beyond the fence, the way they did every July night, loud enough to drown out thought. The air smelled like baked earth and something faintly sweet, hay gone warm from the day's heat. He picked up the lantern from the porch hook and walked toward the barn. He pushed the door open with one hand, holding the lantern up with the other. He saw her. A woman on her side in the far stall, tucked into the corner where the straw was thickest. 3 children pressed against her like small animals seeking warmth, even in the dead of summer heat. The oldest, a girl, maybe 8 or 9, had her head on the woman's shoulder, wide awake, watching Jack with eyes that didn't blink. The woman herself wasn't moving. Jack stepped closer. The lantern light caught her face. Her lips were cracked. Her cheeks were flushed in that particular way that had nothing to do with color and everything to do with fever. One arm was draped over the 2 smallest children, holding them even in unconsciousness. "Hey!" Jack's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Hey! Wake up!" Nothing. The girl, the oldest, sat up slowly. She had dark hair matted at her temples and the look on her face that belonged to someone much older. "She's sick," the girl said. "She's been sick since yesterday." "Who are you people?" "My name's Sarah." The girl said it without flinching. "That's James, that's Beth, and that's Tommy." She pointed to each in turn, a boy of about 6 who was staring at Jack with his jaw set tight, a small girl curled against the sick woman's side, and a toddler, barely 3, who was asleep with his mouth open and one fist clutching the woman's shirt. "And her?" Jack said. "That's Lily. She takes care of us." Jack crouched down. He pressed 2 fingers to Lily's throat. Her pulse was there, thin, fast, irregular. Her skin was burning. "How long has she been like this?" "Since the afternoon. We walked a long way." Sarah hesitated. "We didn't think anyone lived here. We just needed somewhere to stop." "Where'd you walk from?" "Millhaven." Jack looked up. Millhaven was 11 miles east, 11 miles on foot, in July, with 3 small children and a woman already running a fever. He stood and looked at all of them, at the dark circles under Sarah's eyes, at the way James was gripping the sleeve of the sick woman's dress, at the tiny girl Beth, who hadn't said a single word and was watching him with enormous brown eyes. He looked at Tommy, the toddler. The child's lips looked dry. "Does any of them have water?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. Jack turned and walked back to the house. He came back 3 minutes later with a canteen, a wet cloth, and his jaw set. He handed the canteen to Sarah. "Small sips," he said. "All of you. Don't let them drink too fast." He knelt beside Lily and pressed the wet cloth to her forehead. She stirred at the cool touch. Just barely. A small shift of the head, a sharp intake of breath. "Can you hear me?" he said. Her eyes opened. Not all the way, just enough. They were dark eyes, nearly black in the lantern light. And even half-conscious, they had a quality to them. Focused, fighting, present. She looked at him like she was trying to place him in some story she'd already started telling herself. "The children," she said. Her voice was barely sound. "They're right here. They're drinking water." Her eyes moved past him, found them, and something in her face let go. Just a fraction. The fist she hadn't known she was making. "Don't." She stopped, swallowed hard. "Don't send them anywhere. Please." "I'm not sending anybody anywhere tonight," Jack said. "Can you sit up?" She tried. She made it halfway before her arms gave out. Jack caught her without thinking, one hand at her back, steadying, and felt the heat radiating off her like a cook stove. "You've got heat sickness," he said. "Maybe worse." "I know." She didn't sound embarrassed. She sounded like a woman who had already assessed the situation and was working through her options. "I tried to rest before dark. I thought I had more time." "More time before what?" She looked at him steadily. "Before I couldn't keep going." Jack sat back on his heels. He looked at this woman, her cracked lips, her fever-bright eyes, her absolute refusal to look anything but composed, and he felt something shift in his chest. Something he didn't particularly welcome. He stood up. "I'll get the cot from the tack room. You're not sleeping on straw." "We don't need charity." "I didn't offer any." His voice was flat. "I offered a cot. You can refuse it if you want to, but you're going to be a lot less useful to those children tomorrow if you sleep on the ground tonight." A beat of silence. "Thank you," she said quietly. He brought the cot. He brought a second canteen and a bowl of water, and strips of cloth for her wrists and forehead. He moved with the particular efficiency of a man who had spent years doing everything alone, and had learned to make each motion count. He didn't talk while he worked, and she didn't try to fill the silence. The children watched him. James especially, the 6-year-old boy, tracked Jack's every movement with the expression of someone who had learned not to trust quickly, and wasn't about to start now. Jack noticed. When he handed the boy a piece of cornbread from the half-loaf he'd brought from the house, James didn't take it right away. "Go on," Jack said. "Why?" James said. Jack looked at him. "Because you walked 11 miles in July and you haven't eaten." James thought about that. He took the cornbread. "James," Lily's voice, weak but sharp. "Ma'am?" "What do you say?" The boy looked at Jack with an expression that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite defiance. It was something in between. The look of a child who understood the world mostly gave you things with a cost attached. "Thank you, sir," he said. "You're welcome," Jack said. He distributed the rest of the cornbread. Half a piece for Beth, a soft piece pulled apart small for Tommy, a full piece for Sarah, who ate it with quiet desperation and pretended she wasn't starving. He noticed that, too. When he looked back at Lily, she was watching him. "You have children of your own?" she asked. "No," A wife? Something crossed his face. No. She didn't push it. She just nodded, like she'd filed the information away
This
and
story was
closed her
posted
eyes.
on the channel west of Betrayal.
Jack sat down on an
Please do not
overturned
repost
bucket
it
near the
in any
barn
form.
door. He hadn't planned to stay. He'd intended to check on them once more and go inside, get some sleep, figure out in the morning what to do about all of this. But something kept him from moving. Maybe it was the way Tommy had curled up in Lily's arms again, the moment she lay back, with that particular animal certainty that this was the right place to be. Maybe it was the sound of Sarah's breathing evening out as she finally fell asleep. Maybe it was James, who had positioned himself deliberately between the sleeping woman and the barn door, small and serious, and standing watch, the way nobody that age should have to. Jack looked at the boy. "You can sleep," he said quietly. "I'm all right," James said. "I know you are. I'm not going anywhere." James held his gaze for a long moment, testing it. Then he lowered himself slowly to the straw beside Beth and closed his eyes without another word. Jack stayed. The cicadas went on. The heat pressed in through the slats of the barn walls, thick and close, carrying the smell of dry grass and night-blooming something he couldn't name. He sat with his elbows on his knees and listened to 5 people breathe, and tried not to think about what he was going to do come morning. He woke before the children did. He hadn't meant to sleep. He'd simply tipped his head back against the barn wall and closed his eyes for a moment. And the next thing he knew, early gray light was coming through the gaps in the siding, and the rooster he didn't own was crowing somewhere down the road. He checked on Lily first. Her fever had broken in the night. He could tell by the damp at her temples, the way her color had shifted from that dangerous flush to something more human. She was sleeping deeply, one hand still resting on Tommy's small back. Jack went to the house. He started the stove, put on water, pulled together what he had: some beans from last night, dried biscuit, a jar of preserved peaches he'd bought at Yancey's store 3 weeks ago and hadn't opened. He moved around the kitchen the way he always did, in silence, with purpose, not letting himself think too far ahead. He was at the stove when he heard the barn door. Sarah appeared in his kitchen doorway. She'd washed her face somewhere, probably the water trough, and her hair was pulled back neatly, though the dress she wore was faded and mended in 3 places he could see without trying. She stood at the threshold and did not come in without being asked. "Is there something you need?" Jack said, without turning. "I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do to help." He turned then, looked at her. 9 years old, he'd thought last night, standing in a stranger's kitchen doorway, asking if she could be useful. "You know how to set a table?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Plates are in the second cupboard, cups on the shelf above the basin." She moved into the kitchen without ceremony and did exactly what he'd described, locating things quietly and setting them out with a care that said she understood these were not her things and treated them accordingly. "How long has she been sick?" Jack asked. "Before yesterday." Sarah paused with a cup in her hand. "A few days." "She didn't tell us. She kept saying she was fine." A beat. "She always says she's fine." "And the children, how long have you all been traveling?" 11 days. Jack turned from the stove. 11 days. "We left Millhaven after the Hendersons." She stopped, set the cup down carefully. "After our situation changed." He didn't ask what that meant. He had a sense he knew. "Where were you headed?" "Lily said there was work in Calla Ridge, at the Tanner house. She heard they were looking for a housekeeper." Jack turned back to the stove. The Tanner house. Clara Tanner was a widow in her 60s who ran the largest dry goods operation in 3 counties and was known throughout Calla Ridge for 2 things: her sharp business sense and her complete intolerance for anything she considered disorder. A woman arriving with 4 children in tow, one of them a toddler, and one of them barely recovered from heat sickness, would not find a warm welcome at the Tanner house. Jack knew that without needing to think twice. He didn't say it out loud. Lily appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, moving carefully, one hand briefly touching the door frame for balance before she let it go. She'd straightened her dress and pinned her hair. She looked, at first glance, like a woman who was perfectly well. At second glance, the slight deliberateness of each step, the way she measured her breathing, she looked like a woman who had decided she was going to appear perfectly well, and was paying for that decision with every muscle in her body. "You should be sitting down," Jack said. "I've been lying down all night." She looked at the table, at the plates Sarah had set, the biscuits, the open jar of peaches. Something moved across her face. She swallowed it back. "Mr. Miller, Jack Miller." "Mr. Miller." She met his eyes directly. "I apologize for the imposition. We'll be out of your barn within the hour." "Sit down," he said. "I appreciate Mrs." He stopped. "What's your name?" "Lily Crane." "Mrs. Crane, you had heat sickness bad enough to lose consciousness 11 miles from anywhere in the middle of July. You're not walking anywhere within the hour." He set a cup of water on the table in front of the closest chair. "Sit down." She looked at the chair. She looked at him. He could see her working through it, the options, the costs, the particular arithmetic of a woman who had learned to calculate dependency the way other people calculated debts. She sat down. "Thank you," she said, with a precision that made the words mean exactly what they said, and nothing more. The children came in by ones and twos. Beth first, holding Sarah's hand, then James, then Tommy, who arrived last because he had apparently spent several minutes sitting in the straw, talking to Jack's old horse through the stall fence, and had needed to be retrieved. They settled around the table with that particular quiet of children who have learned that other people's spaces require careful behavior. Jack put food on the table and sat at the end of it and watched them eat. James still watched him. Beth had apparently decided he wasn't a threat, because she was now studying the pattern on the rim of her cup with intense interest. Tommy ate 3 biscuits and a significant portion of the peaches, and fell half asleep in his chair with his face sticky. Lily ate slowly, carefully, like someone rediscovering the concept. Nobody talked much. When the meal was done, Sarah stood and began collecting plates without being asked. James helped. Lily watched them both with an expression that Jack couldn't quite decode. Something between pride and a grief that had nowhere particular to go. "The Tanner house," Jack said. Lily looked up. "You're heading there for work." "That's the plan." "Clara Tanner is—" He chose the word with some consideration. "She runs a tight household." Lily looked at him for a moment. "You're telling me she won't take us on?" He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. She nodded once. She didn't look surprised, just recalculating. The way she'd looked the night before, when he told her she couldn't sleep on the floor. Already moving to the next option, before the first one had fully closed. It was not a helpless gesture. It was the opposite. It was a woman who had learned that the world rarely offered a clear path, and had gotten very good at finding the edges. "Then I'll find something else," she said. "In Calla Ridge." "Or the next town." "Next town's Redfield, 30 miles. She held his gaze. "Then I'll find something in Calla Ridge." James set the last cup on the sideboard and turned around. "She always finds something," he said. It wasn't boasting. It was just a fact, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had seen it proven enough times to believe it completely. Jack looked at the boy, then at Lily, then, against his better judgment, at the window. at the white, blazing sky outside, the cracked
This story
earth,
was posted
the
on the
fence
channel
line
west
that
of
needed 3
Betrayal.
more hours
Please
of work.
do not repost it in
He
any
thought
form.
about silence, about 6 years of it, about the way this kitchen had felt this morning with 5 people in it, loud with small sounds, cluttered with small presences, everything slightly off its careful order. He had not missed it. He told himself that clearly. "You can stay," he said, "until you're well enough to go." Lily said nothing for a moment. "That's generous." "It's practical. You collapse again on that road, those children are on their own." He stood and carried his cup to the basin. "There's a room off the back of the house. It's small. I use it for storage, but there's space. Kids can sleep in the barn. It's cooler than inside at night anyway. I'll clear the cot for you." He was already moving toward the back door. He'd said what he was going to say, and he didn't particularly want to be thanked for it. He'd had enough of that this morning. "Mr. Miller." He stopped. Lily's voice, steady, clear, carrying something in it that wasn't gratitude exactly. Something more careful than that. "We'll earn our keep," she said. "Every day we're here." He looked back at her once, at the set of her shoulders, at the way James was standing just behind her, not quite at her side, close enough to be counted. "I know you will," Jack said. He went out to fix the fence. The fence didn't fix itself in a day, and neither did Lily Crane. Jack came back that evening to find the back room cleared, not partially, not halfway, but completely. The broken seed crates he'd stacked against the wall were gone. The old harness he'd tossed in the corner 6 months ago and forgotten about was hanging on a hook in the barn. The floor had been swept clean. There was a folded blanket on the cot that he did not recognize, which meant she'd found the cedar chest at the foot of the hall closet and taken the initiative to open it. The room still smelled like dust and disuse, but it no longer looked like a place where things went to be abandoned. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "I said you could stay," he said to the empty room. "I didn't say you had to work yourself back into a fever doing it." Lily's voice came from the kitchen. "I'm fine." "You said that before, and you ended up unconscious in my barn." She appeared in the hallway, drying her hands on a cloth. She looked better than she had that morning. The fever color was gone, replaced by something that might have been actual health, or might have been sheer determination. With her, Jack was beginning to think it was often difficult to tell the difference. "The children helped," she said. "Even Tommy carried things. Well," a pause. "He carried one thing. He dropped it twice, but he tried." Jack looked at her. "How's your head?" "Clear." "Dizzy?" "Not since this afternoon." "You eaten?" "Mr. Miller." Her voice was patient but firm, the way you spoke to someone who was asking the same question from different angles, hoping for a different answer. "I'm standing in front of you. I'm not swaying. My eyes are focused. I'm fine." He looked at her for a moment, longer than was strictly necessary. "There's leftover beans on the stove," he said, and walked past her to the kitchen. She followed, and neither of them mentioned that she'd already found the beans and reheated them. The children ate again, Tommy barely, because he'd apparently gotten into the peach preserves at some point during the afternoon and had made a thorough job of it. And afterwards, Sarah and James did the washing up, with a quiet competence that Jack was beginning to recognize as their default mode. These were children who had learned early that the easiest way to be allowed to stay somewhere was to be useful. He didn't like thinking about how they'd learned that. Beth sat beside him at the table without asking permission or offering explanation, which startled him at first. She didn't say anything. She just sat there with her small hands flat on the table and watched him drink his coffee with the serene attention of a cat deciding whether or not someone was worth trusting. "She does that," James said from the basin, without looking up. She picks somebody and she just watches them. It don't mean nothing. Doesn't, Lily said. Doesn't mean nothing. Jack looked at Beth. Beth looked back at him. He had the distinct and uncomfortable feeling that she was arriving at conclusions. All right, he said. Beth nodded solemnly, as though he'd confirmed something. The next 3 days fell into a shape that Jack hadn't planned and couldn't quite account for. He rose before the house did, went out to the cattle, came back to a kitchen that had coffee already made. That was Lily, who apparently slept less than any person he'd ever encountered. The children woke in stages. Tommy was always last, and always confused about where he was for approximately 45 seconds before he remembered, and became cheerful with a speed that Jack found slightly alarming. James was first up after Lily, and had generally already found something to occupy himself by the time Jack came in from the morning chores. A broken board on the porch he'd decided needed attention. A bucket he'd noticed had a loose handle. Small repairs undertaken with a focus that was too intense for a 6-year-old, and almost painful to watch. Jack showed him how to set a nail properly on the second morning. He hadn't planned to. He'd just seen the boy working at it wrong, and the words came out before he could stop them. James looked at him with that measuring expression, then moved slightly aside and watched Jack demonstrate, then tried it himself. He got it on the second attempt. There, Jack said. James looked at the nail, then at the hammer, then at Jack. My pa used to say you could tell a man's character by how he held a hammer. Jack was quiet for a moment. Your pa sound like a smart man. He was. James went back to work. He died last winter. Jack crouched beside him, kept his voice even. I'm sorry. Lily says he's somewhere good. You believe her? James considered this with a seriousness that no 6-year-old should have been capable of, and most adults weren't. Most of the time, he said. Some days it's harder. Jack nodded. He didn't offer anything else, and James didn't ask for it. They went on working. It was that evening, coming back from the eastern fence line, that Jack heard voices from inside the house and slowed his walk without meaning to. Lily's voice, low and urgent, and another voice, a man's. He pushed open the front door. The man standing in his kitchen was Roy Decker, who ran a middling cattle operation 2 miles north and had made a habit for years of appearing wherever he wasn't strictly needed. He was broad across the shoulders, hat in hand, and smiling the particular smile of someone who had come prepared to be charming and was slightly annoyed that it wasn't landing. Lily was standing on the other side of the kitchen table. Not cowering, that was the first thing Jack registered. She was standing straight, arms at her sides, watching Decker the way you watched something you hadn't decided was safe yet. Miller! Decker turned, the smile shifting. Didn't hear you come in. I live here, Jack said. He looked at Lily. Everything all right? Mister. Decker came to introduce himself, Lily said. Her voice was perfectly level. He was just leaving. Decker let out a short laugh. Now, I was only being neighborly. She said you were leaving, Jack said. The smile on Decker's face didn't disappear. It reorganized itself into something flatter. You've got yourself quite the situation here, Jack. Woman and 4 children show up out of nowhere. You take them in, don't tell a soul in town. Not a lot of people I need to report to. Clara Tanner's been asking about some woman looking for work. Said she sent word she was coming and never showed. Decker looked at Lily with a deliberateness that made Jack's jaw set. Seems like your plans changed. That's my business, Lily said. Might be more than yours, depending. Decker set his hat back on his head. Small town, Mrs. Crane, Lily said. Mrs. Crane. People talk. Woman living out on a bachelor's property with 4 children, no husband in sight. Those children need supper, Jack said. He walked to the door and opened it. "I'll tell them you said goodnight." Decker looked at him for a long beat.
This story was
Then he
posted
walked
on the
out.
channel West of
Jack
Betrayal.
closed the door.
Please do not repost
He turned to
it in
find
any
Lily
form.
watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately name. Not relief. That would have been too simple. It was something more complicated. Something that acknowledged what had just happened without wanting to make more of it than it was. "He'll talk," she said. "He talks about everything. Always has. It'll cause problems for you." "Let me worry about my problems." Jack crossed to the stove and lifted the lid on the pot she'd left there. "You made dinner." "I made dinner." "Smells like actual food." Something changed in her face. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. "It's just stew, salt pork and whatever was left in the root cellar. James found some onions." James found them, or James decided the root cellar needed investigating, and the onions were a consequence? This time, it was a real smile. Brief, controlled, but real. The second one. Jack set the lid back down. "He's going to fix everything on this property that might conceivably be broken, and some things that aren't." "I know." The smile faded into something softer. "His father was a builder. He doesn't know what to do with his hands when they're still." Jack looked at her. "How long ago did you take them on?" She was quiet for a moment. 8 months. Their mother was my neighbor. She got sick in November, the same fever that took their father in October. She asked me to look after them until she was better. Lily's hands were still at her sides. She didn't get better. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of the stew settling in the pot. "You had family of your own?" Jack asked. "A husband. He left 2 years before that." She said it without particular heat, just fact, delivered cleanly. So when Margaret asked, there wasn't anyone else to consider. That's a heavy thing to take on alone. It would have been heavier to say no. She moved to the cupboard and began taking down bowls. "Call the children in. Supper's ready." He called them in, and if he stood at the door a moment longer than necessary, watching the way Tommy launched himself at Lily's legs the second he came through, and the way her hand dropped automatically to the boy's hair, smoothing it without thinking, he didn't examine the feeling that produced. He filed it somewhere he didn't intend to open. The real trouble started on the 6th day. Jack had gone into Calla Ridge for supplies: flour, salt, lamp oil, things that couldn't wait. He'd left before the children were fully awake and told Lily he'd be back by noon. He was back by 10 because Yancey's store was quick, and he had no desire to stand around the feed counter making conversation. He knew something was wrong before he tied his horse. The front door was open wider than he'd left it. Sarah was sitting on the porch steps with her knees pulled up and her face in her hands. She looked up when she heard him, and her expression told him everything and nothing at the same time. "Where's Lily?" he said. "Inside. Mr. Pratt came." Jack went inside. Harlan Pratt was the county land agent, a thin, precise man who wore the same gray coat in every season and kept his records with the care of someone who understood that other people's misfortune, properly documented, was its own kind of asset. He was standing in the middle of Jack's front room with a folded paper in his hand and the patient expression of someone who had delivered bad news so many times that it had become a professional skill. Lily was facing him. Her back was to Jack. He could see it in the set of her shoulders. She'd gone still, the way she went still when she was managing something. "What's this?" Jack said. Pratt turned. "Mr. Miller, I was just explaining to Mrs. Crane. Explain it again." Pratt unfolded the paper with the precision of someone who took satisfaction in paperwork. "The children in this household, Sarah, James, Elizabeth, and Thomas Holloway, are wards of Millhaven County under the provisions of the indigency statute passed in 1876. Mrs. Crane's informal guardianship was never legally formalized. He held out the paper. I have a court order for their return to the county orphan board. They'll be assessed for placement. The silence that followed had a particular quality to it, the kind that isn't empty, but is instead very full of things nobody is saying. Their mother asked me to take them, Lily said. Her voice was controlled, but only just. Margaret Holloway, she asked me directly. There were witnesses. A deathbed request is not a legal instrument, Mrs. Crane. It's a promise, she said. Pratt had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable. Then the professional expression reasserted itself. I understand that, but the law is— Whose law? Jack said. Pratt looked at him. I beg your pardon? I said, whose law? Because Margaret Holloway is dead, and her children are standing in my kitchen eating breakfast, and nobody filed a complaint until somebody in town decided to make a phone call. He looked at the paper without taking it. Who initiated this? Pratt's expression shifted a fraction. That's not information I'm— Decker, Lily said quietly. Jack looked at her.
He said, small town, people talk. Her voice was flat now, stripped of everything except the fact of it. He meant he'd make sure of it.
Jack turned back to Pratt. Those children have a roof, and food, and someone who— He stopped. Started again. You're going to take them to a county board. For proper placement, you know what proper placement means in this county. You've seen those placements. Pratt said nothing. Give me 2 weeks, Jack said. Pratt blinked. I'm sorry? 2 weeks. I'll formalize the guardianship. I'll get a lawyer. There are legal channels for this, and you know it as well as I do. That order is a first step, not a final one. Jack looked the man level in the eye. Give me 2 weeks before you put those children in a wagon. Pratt was quiet for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. He looked at the paper. He looked at Lily, who was watching him with dark eyes that asked nothing and demanded everything simultaneously. He looked at the doorway to the kitchen, where James had appeared without sound and was standing with both hands at his sides and his chin up, listening. 10 days, Pratt said. He refolded the paper and put it in his coat pocket and showed himself out. The front door closed behind him. Neither Jack nor Lily moved for a moment. Then James said from the doorway, Are they taking us? Lily turned. She crossed to him in 3 steps and crouched down to his level. She put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him straight on, the way she always did. No softening, no false comfort, just the full weight of her attention. No, she said. I'm going to make sure of it. But that man gave us 10 days. She held the boy's gaze. That's enough time. Do you trust me? James looked at her, the same measuring look he gave everything and everyone. Then, slowly, he nodded. Lily stood up and turned to face Jack. He was already thinking. He could see it, the way his jaw was set, the way he was staring at the middle distance 3 inches to the left of her face, working through something. You said a lawyer, she said. Ed Haverford in town. He's a fair man, not Decker's type. Can you afford him? Jack looked at her. That's not your concern. It is very much. It isn't. His voice wasn't harsh. It was just decided. I'll go see him this afternoon. Lily was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face. The same thing she'd been managing since Pratt walked in. That particular calculation between what pride required and what the children needed. The two of them sitting on opposite ends of a scale that she'd been trying to balance for 8 months. Why are you doing this? She said. The question hung in the air between them, plain and direct, the way she did everything. Not accusing, not testing, just asking. Jack was quiet for long enough that the silence itself became its own kind of answer. Then he said, Because Harlan Pratt drove out here with a piece of paper and a tidy expression,
This
and
story
that boy
was
has been
posted on the
fixing
channel
boards on my
west of
porch
Betrayal.
since before
Please do not
breakfast.
repost it in any form.
Lily looked at him. And because your friend Margaret asked you to keep a promise, he said. And a promise ought to count for something. She turned away before he could see whatever the expression was that crossed her face. She moved to the kitchen with that particular purposeful walk, the one that said she was going somewhere, so she had somewhere to go. "I'll have lunch ready before you leave," she said. Jack put his hat on. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She didn't look back. "Let me." He let her. He was halfway to the door when Beth appeared in the hallway, silent as smoke, and looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes. "Is Lily gonna fix it?" she asked. Jack crouched down to her level. This small, quiet child, who watched everything and said almost nothing, and had apparently decided in the first 24 hours that he was trustworthy enough to ask direct questions. "We both are," he said. Beth considered this. Then she walked past him toward the kitchen, apparently satisfied, and Jack heard her say something to Lily, in a voice too small for him to catch, and he heard Lily answer, soft, steady, certain, and he stood in the hallway of his own house and felt something cracking open in his chest that he hadn't felt in 6 years. He did not examine it. He went to find Ed Haverford. Ed Haverford's office smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper, and the man himself looked like someone who had spent 30 years listening to people's worst days and had developed a face that could hold all of it without flinching. He read Pratt's order twice. Then he set it on the desk and folded his hands on top of it. 10 days, he said. That's what he gave us. And the mother's request. You have witnesses? Lily does. 2 women from Millhaven who were present when Margaret Holloway asked her. Haverford was quiet for a moment. Getting those women to testify before a county judge in 10 days is not impossible. It's close to impossible. He looked at Jack over his folded hands. You understand the distinction. Tell me what we need. Affidavits from the witnesses. A formal petition for guardianship filed with the county court. Character references. For Mrs. Crane, and given that she's currently residing on your property, for you as well. He paused. And ideally, something that demonstrates these children have a stable, permanent home, not a temporary arrangement. Jack was quiet for a beat. Define permanent. Haverford looked at him the way experienced men look at people who are asking questions they already know the answers to. A household, Mr. Miller. A recognized one. Jack rode back to the farm with the afternoon sun pressing down on the back of his neck and Haverford's words sitting in the center of his chest like a stone he hadn't decided what to do with yet. Lily was on the porch when he got back. She'd been watching for him. He could tell by the way she straightened when he came up the road, the way she came down the steps to meet him before he'd even tied the horse. Well, she said. He told her everything Haverford had said. He left nothing out. She listened without interrupting, her arms crossed, her eyes on his face the entire time, and when he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. The witnesses, she said. Ada Morse and Ruth Calloway. They were both there. Ada wrote me a letter after Margaret died. She said if I ever needed her to speak on my behalf, she would. Can you get them here in 10 days? I can write today. Ada's husband has a wagon. If they leave by Thursday... She was already calculating. It's possible. Lily. He said her name for the first time without thinking about it, and it stopped her mid-sentence. She looked at him. Haverford says we need to show the court a permanent home, not a temporary arrangement. She held his gaze. I know what that means. I'm not sure you do. He was specific about it. He means we'd need to be... She stopped, looked away, then back. He means married. The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. Jack held his ground. He didn't say that directly. He said a recognized household. In this county in 1878, Mr. Miller, for a woman living on a man's property with 4 children, a recognized household means married. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. And I am not going to ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm telling you what the lawyer said. There's a difference between the two things.
Is there?
She turned away from him and put both hands on the porch railing, and for a moment she just stood there with her back to him, breathing. When she turned back, her face was composed the way it always was, that deliberate composure that he had come to understand was not coldness, but armor. "Write to Ada," Jack said. "Get the affidavits. Let Haverford file the petition. We'll handle the rest when we get there." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most stubborn man I have ever met." "I've been called worse." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite softened, but shifted. "So have I," she said, and went inside to write the letter. The letter went out the next morning with the postwriter, and the town's opinion arrived the same afternoon. It came in the form of 3 women from the Calla Ridge Ladies' Auxiliary. Mrs. Decker first among them, which was not a coincidence, who appeared at the gate in their Sunday clothes on a Wednesday with the particular energy of people delivering concern as a weapon. Jack saw them coming from the barn and came out to meet them before they reached the porch. "Ladies," he said. Mrs. Decker, plump, pleasant-faced, with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less, smiled at him with the warmth of someone who had rehearsed it. "Jack, we heard you had company." "I have guests." "Of course." She looked past him toward the house. "A widow woman and 4 children. The whole town's talking about it." "That's so." "People are concerned. Naturally." She folded her hands. "It's not the most conventional arrangement." "No," Jack agreed. "Roy mentioned that Mrs. Crane was looking for work at Clara Tanner's house. Clara did say she'd expected someone, but—" Mrs. Decker paused delicately. "Well, given that she settled herself here instead, people do wonder." "What people wonder," Jack said, "is their own business." Mrs. Decker blinked. "We're only trying to—" "I know what you're trying to do." His voice was even, unhurried, and absolutely without warmth. "You've had a nice drive out here. I hope the road wasn't too dusty." He turned and walked back to the barn. There was a silence behind him that had a certain quality to it, the silence of 3 women recalibrating rapidly. Then Mrs. Decker said, to no one in particular, "Well." Jack kept walking. Lily appeared in the doorway. She had heard. He knew she'd heard because the kitchen window was open and it faced the yard directly, and Lily Crane missed approximately nothing. She looked at him, and then at the 3 women at the gate, and then back at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly when he reached the porch. "I know." "It'll make things worse." "Probably." He looked at her. "You all right?" She held his gaze for a moment, and something in hers was complicated. Gratitude tangled up with something fiercer, something that didn't have a name yet. "Yes," she said. "Good." He went inside. 3 days later, Tommy got sick. Not the heat sickness, not something that could be managed with wet cloths and water and a day of rest. He woke in the night crying with a fever that was different from Lily's, sharper, climbing faster, and by morning, his breathing had developed a catch in it that made Lily's face go very still when she pressed her ear to his back. "Croup," she said. Jack was already pulling on his boots. "Doc Alderman's in town. I can get him here in an hour." "It might not be—" "Lily." He looked at her directly, the same way she looked at the children when she needed them to hear her. "Let me get the doctor." She nodded once. He rode hard both ways. Doc Alderman was a small, unhurried man who had practiced medicine in Calla Ridge for
This
22
story was
years
posted on the channel
and had
west
developed the
of
particular
Betrayal.
steadiness
Please
of
do
someone
not
who had
repost
seen
it
most
in any
things
form.
and survived them. He examined Tommy with a thoroughness that felt almost leisurely, asked Lily a series of precise questions, listened to her answers with complete attention, and then sat back. "It's croup," he said. "You were right." He looked at Lily with something that was closer to respect than most people had shown her since she'd arrived in this town. "You've dealt with this before." "James had it 2 winters ago." "Then you know what we're doing." He began laying out what he'd need. Steam, cool night air alternating. Keep him upright as much as possible. I'll leave you something for the fever. He looked at the small boy, who was watching him with eyes that were too bright and too glassy. "He's young and he's small. We need to take it seriously." "I am taking it seriously," Lily said. "I know you are." He said it without condescension, just fact. "I meant the household." He looked at Jack when he said it. Jack nodded. They were up all night. Lily held Tommy through most of it, sitting upright in the kitchen chair with him against her chest, regulating his breathing through sheer proximity and will. Sarah sat at the table and refused to go to bed, which Lily allowed after the first hour, because sending her away would have required energy she didn't have, and the girl's presence was, if she was honest, a comfort. James fell asleep on the bench by the wall, and James was not moved, because James had been awake for 36 hours at that point, and the sleep claimed him absolutely. Jack kept the steam going. It was not a complicated thing. Water on the stove, kettle maintained, the level watched and refilled. But it required someone to be awake, and he was awake, and so he did it. He moved quietly between the stove and the window, checking the sky the way he checked it on bad weather nights, marking the hours. At 2 in the morning, Lily said, very quietly, "You should sleep." "I'll sleep when the fever breaks." She looked at him over Tommy's head. The child was quieter now. The croup bark had softened, which was a good sign. His small hands were loose against Lily's arm. "You've been up since 4 yesterday," she said. "So have you." "I'm used to it." "You were sick 4 days ago." "I was sick 6 days ago. I'm fine now." Jack turned from the stove. He looked at her, at this woman who had walked 11 miles in July with a fever she hadn't told anyone about, who had taken on 4 children because her neighbor had asked, and there was nobody else, who had filed the weight of Harlan Pratt's court order in the same internal place she filed everything that needed managing, and had simply gone on managing. He looked at her, and he thought about 6 years of silence and what it had cost him, and what he had told himself it was worth. "I know you're fine," he said. "I know you're always fine. I'm asking you to let me stay awake anyway." Lily was quiet for a moment. Something moved in her face. Moved and then stilled, the way a candle flame moves in a draft and then steadies. "All right," she said. The fever broke at 4:30. Tommy went limp against Lily's chest with a particular completeness of a child whose body had been fighting and had finally, exhaustedly, won. His breathing evened out. The rattling catch was gone. Lily pressed her lips to the top of his head and closed her eyes for just a moment. Just one moment. And in that moment, her face was entirely unguarded. It held everything she'd been managing all night. The fear she hadn't named. The love that was too large and too costly, and that she carried anyway. The bone-deep relief of a woman who had almost lost something she could not afford to lose. Jack saw it. He turned away to give her the privacy of it. When he looked back, she was composed again. She looked up at him and said, "Thank you." And it was the most stripped-down, honest thing she'd said since she arrived. No calculation in it. No careful accounting of what she owed and what she didn't. Just the plain truth of it, given directly. "Don't," he said. She frowned slightly. "Don't what?" "Don't thank me like I did you a favor." He sat down across the table from her. He was tired in a way that went past the body, and he was past the point of being careful. "Those kids have been here 9 days. James fixed 4 things on this property that I'd been meaning to get to for a year. Sarah reorganized my pantry in a way that actually makes sense. Beth—" He stopped. "Beth sat down next to me last Tuesday like she'd been doing it her whole life, and I didn't know what to do with that. And I still don't. And Tommy—" He looked at the child sleeping against her chest. "Tommy showed my horse a blade of grass through the fence yesterday and talked to him for 10 minutes like it was a normal conversation." Lily was watching him. "I don't want thanks," Jack said. "I'm telling you what's true." The kitchen was quiet, except for the stove and Tommy's steady breathing, and the first birds beginning somewhere outside in the dark before dawn. "Jack," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. She said it the way she did most things, carefully, precisely, meaning it. He looked at her. "What happened to you?" she said. 6 years ago. Whatever it was that put you out here alone." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the birds were getting louder. The sky would start changing soon. "Her name was Caroline," he said. "We were supposed to be married in April of '72. She left in March." He looked at the table. "She wasn't wrong to. I had this place, but I didn't have much else. I thought the land was enough. I thought working hard was the same thing as being present." He paused. "It isn't." Lily said nothing. She just listened. The way she listened to everything, completely, without preparing her next response. "After she left, I stopped trying to figure out the difference," Jack said, "between working and living. I just worked." "And now?" He looked at her, at Tommy asleep, at Sarah with her head tipped onto her folded arms at the end of the table, finally sleeping, at James on the bench. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm starting to." The sound came from the yard before Lily could answer. Hooves, multiple horses, moving fast and then stopping. Jack was up before the sound fully registered. He went to the window. 4 riders. Early gray light, but enough to see by. He recognized the horse in front. A black roan with a blaze mark, Roy Decker's animal. Beside him, the unmistakable gray coat of Harlan Pratt. And beside Pratt, a man Jack didn't know, heavyset, with the bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Who is that?" Lily said behind him. She'd shifted Tommy to Sarah, who had startled awake and was standing at his shoulder. "I don't know the third man." She was silent for exactly 1 second. "I do," she said. Her voice had gone very flat. "That's Gerald Marsh. He's on the county orphan board." Jack turned to look at her. "They're not waiting for the 10 days, she said. He could see it in her face. The thing she'd been managing cracking open. Just for a second. Just enough to show the terror beneath it. Then she sealed it back, squared her shoulders, turned to Sarah, who was holding Tommy and watching with enormous eyes. "Take the children to the back room," Lily said. "Lock the door from the inside. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." "Lily?" "Sarah." Her voice was iron. "Now." Sarah gathered Tommy, shook James awake with one hand, took Beth's hand with the other, and moved. The backroom door closed. The lock clicked. Lily turned to Jack. "I will not let them take those children," she said. Each word was deliberate, separate, absolutely certain. Jack looked at her face. He looked at the yard where Pratt and Decker and Gerald Marsh were dismounting with the organized purposefulness of men who had come to do a specific thing and intended to do it. He looked back at her. "Neither will I," he said. He opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Jack stood on the porch with his
This
arms
story
at his
was
sides
posted on the channel
and watched
west
the
of
three men
Betrayal.
come through his gate
Please do not
like they
repost
owned the
it
ground
in
they
any
walked
form.
on. Harlan Pratt led, which was no surprise.
Gerald Marsh came second, and up close, he was exactly what Jack had expected. The kind of man whose authority lived entirely in paperwork and the people willing to enforce it. Roy Decker hung back near the horses, which told Jack everything about the man's character in a single image. He'd started this. He didn't want to stand in the front row of it. "Miller," Pratt said. "You've got 7 days left on that agreement," Jack said. Pratt had the grace to look uncomfortable. Marsh did not. He stepped forward with a folded document that was thicker than Pratt's had been, and held it out like a man offering something he expected to be taken. "Emergency provision," Marsh said. His voice was flat, businesslike, utterly indifferent. "Given the irregular living circumstances and the unresolved guardianship status, the board has authorized immediate transfer of the minors to county custody, pending a formal hearing." "Irregular circumstances," Jack said. "A single woman, without legal guardianship, residing on a bachelor's property with 4 minor children." "Yes." Marsh looked at him without blinking. "Those circumstances. The children are inside. They're healthy and fed and sleeping in a clean room." Jack didn't move from the porch. "You rode out here before dawn on a Tuesday to fix what exactly?" The law gave us 10 days. You're here on day 9. Marsh's expression shifted slightly. "The emergency provision supersedes—" "What emergency?" Jack's voice was still level, but it had a quality to it now. The particular quiet of a man who had made a decision and was standing behind it. "A child had croup 3 days ago. The doctor came, the fever broke, the child is fine. That's not an emergency. That's Tuesday." From behind him, he heard the front door open. Lily stepped out and stood beside him. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. She simply stood there at his shoulder, with her arms at her sides, and looked at Marsh the way you looked at something you had already decided to outlast. Marsh looked at her, then at Jack, then back at her. "Mrs. Crane, I'd advise you not to complicate this." "I haven't complicated anything," she said. "You have a petition, and Mr. Miller has a lawyer, and the court has a hearing date. That's not complicated. That's a process. The process can be accelerated when the board determines on whose request," Jack said. He looked past Marsh to where Decker was standing by the horses, studying his own boots. "Roy, you want to come up here and say it to her face?" Decker looked up. Something moved across his expression. Not shame, exactly, but its distant cousin. He didn't move. "That's what I thought," Jack said. Marsh straightened. "Mr. Miller, I'm authorized to remove those children today. If you obstruct—" "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm standing on my porch." Jack looked at the document in Marsh's hand. "You want to enforce that order? You go get Judge Whitfield to sign off on it personally. Not Pratt, not the board, the judge. Because Ed Haverford is going to be in that courthouse when it opens this morning. And he is going to file a counter-petition. And if you take those children out of this house before Whitfield rules on it, you are going to have a problem that paperwork can't fix." The yard was very quiet. A bird called somewhere in the brush beyond the fence. The horses shifted. Marsh looked at Pratt. Pratt looked at the document in Marsh's hand with the expression of a man who was reconsidering his morning. "You're bluffing," Marsh said. "Ride to Haverford's office," Jack said. "Knock on the door. Ask him." Another silence. This one longer. Then Marsh folded the document and put it inside his coat. "This isn't finished," he said. "I know it isn't." Jack's voice was even. "That's what hearings are for." Marsh turned and walked back to his horse. Pratt followed without making eye contact with either of them. Decker was already mounted, which meant he'd been ready to leave before the conversation ended, which meant he'd known how it was going to go. They rode out. Jack stayed on the porch until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he turned. Lily was looking at him with an expression that was entirely unguarded for exactly 3 seconds before she got it back under control. In those 3 seconds, he saw everything she'd been holding. The terror from the night, the sleeplessness, the accumulated weight of 9 days of managing the unmanageable. And then it was gone, and she was herself again, composed and precise and already moving to the next problem. "You need to get to Haverford," she said. "I know. Before they do." "I know." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I will be when those children are legally mine."
She said it the way she said most things that mattered, without decoration, without softening. Just the plain truth of it, standing on its own. Jack rode to town. Ed Haverford answered the door in his shirt sleeves with coffee in hand and listened to Jack's account of the morning with a face that grew progressively more focused as the story went on. When Jack finished, Haverford set down his coffee cup and said, "Marsh overstepped." "I know he did. The emergency provision requires a documented crisis. Croup that resolved 3 days ago does not qualify." He was already moving to his desk. "The counter-petition is half-drafted. I need 2 more hours. Marsh is going to push for a hearing date." "Let him push. I want Thursday. Judge Whitfield is fair, and he dislikes Gerald Marsh personally, which is not nothing." Haverford looked up from his papers. "The affidavits from Millhaven. Has Mrs. Crane heard back?" "She's expecting a reply today or tomorrow." She needs to send a second letter. Faster route. Have her ask Ada Morse to send a telegraph from Millhaven to my office. A sworn statement by telegraph is not ideal, but it's admissible for a preliminary hearing. He wrote something on the corner of a page. "And Jack?" Jack turned at the door. Haverford looked at him steadily. "The question of the household. We're not going to be able to avoid it at the hearing. Whitfield is going to ask." "I know. What do you want me to tell him?" Jack was quiet for a moment. He thought about Lily on the porch that morning, the way she'd stepped out and stood beside him without being asked, without touching him, without needing to say a single word. The way that had felt, standing next to her, like something clicking into a place he hadn't known was empty. "Tell him the truth," Jack said. "We're working on it." Haverford nodded once. "Get me those affidavits." Jack got back to the farm at noon to find that the morning had not been idle. Ada Morse's reply letter had arrived on the early post. Not a telegraph, but a letter, 3 pages long, written in a hand that was careful and deliberate, and said everything that needed saying. Ada had been present when Margaret Holloway asked Lily to take the children. Ruth Calloway had been there too. Both of them had signed the letter in front of Millhaven's postmaster, who had countersigned as witness. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table when Jack came in, the letter in her hands, and her face was doing something he hadn't seen from her yet. Not crying. He wasn't sure Lily Crane cried, or if she did, not where anyone could observe it. But her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with fever, and her jaw was set with a particular tension of someone not allowing themselves to feel the full force of something. "Ada came through," she said. "I see that." He sat down across from her. "Haverford says send her a telegraph as well. Back up." "I'll go this afternoon." She set the letter down carefully, smoothing the edge of it with her thumb. She says Margaret talked about me to her before she died. She said Margaret told her that if she had to go, she was glad it was me." Jack didn't say anything. I wasn't trying to take those children from anything,"
I was trying to keep a promise. She looked at the letter. I need the court to understand that. Haverford will make them understand
This
it.
story was posted
I
on the
need to
channel
make them
West of
understand it.
Betrayal.
She looked
Please
up.
do not repost it
I want to
in any
speak at the
form.
hearing. That's your right. Haverford might advise against it. Haverford might, Jack said, but I'd listen to you. Something moved in her face. She looked at him for a moment with that steady, dark gaze that he had learned, over 9 days, to read the same way you learn to read weather. Not perfectly, not always correctly, but with increasing accuracy. What he read now was something that had been building for days and hadn't yet found its form. Jack, she said. I know, he said. She blinked. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say something about the household, about what Haverford said, about what the judge is going to ask. She was quiet. I've been thinking about it since I left his office, Jack said, and I want to say something before you do. She waited. I'm not going to dress it up, he said. I know it's not what either of us planned. I know you walked into my barn 10 days ago trying to get somewhere else, and this wasn't the destination. He looked at his hands on the table, then at her face. But I'm going to ask you to marry me. And I want you to know that I'm asking because I mean it. Not for the hearing, not for Whitfield, because those children are in my back room right now. And James fixed my fence, and Beth sat next to me at breakfast this morning and told me my coffee smelled bad. Lily made a sound that was very close to a laugh, and I am not going to let Gerald Marsh put them in a wagon. He paused. And because you're the most... He stopped, restarted. Because I would like you to stay. After the hearing, after all of it. I'm asking you to stay. Lily looked at him for a long time. That is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard, she said. I know. You didn't even... She stopped. The almost laugh again, and this time it stayed in her face a little longer. You didn't even ask. You just stated intentions. I told you I wasn't going to dress it up. She looked at the letter from Ada Morse. She looked at her own hands. She looked at him with those dark eyes that held everything and gave away nothing until they decided to. Yes, she said. The word was quiet, plain, entirely certain. Jack let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Yes, she said again, like she was confirming it to herself as much as to him. But I need you to know something first. All right. I am not easy, she said. I have 4 children that are mine in every way that matters, even if the court hasn't said so yet. I have opinions about most things, and I will tell you when I think you're wrong. I am not going to stop being who I am because... Lily. He said her name the way she'd said his the night Tommy's fever broke. Quietly, meaning it. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him steadily. Good, she said. Then the back room door opened and Beth appeared, because Beth always appeared at the exact moment the room changed, as though she had some internal instrument that detected it. She looked at both of them with her enormous brown eyes, and then said to Lily with perfect seriousness, Tommy put a frog in James's boot. Did he? Lily said. James is very upset. From the back room came the sound of James expressing his upset with considerable volume. Lily stood. She looked at Jack once more, and in that look was everything that had just passed between them, acknowledged and set aside for later, the way you set aside something valuable when you need your hands free. Then she went to manage the frog situation. Jack sat at the table alone for a moment. He thought he might be smiling. He wasn't entirely sure. He hadn't done it in a while. The hearing was set for Thursday. 2 days. Wednesday was the longest day Jack could remember
since the winter of '74, when a blizzard had shut down the roads for 9 days and he'd had nothing but cattle and silence and his own thoughts for company. The waiting had the particular quality of something that couldn't be hurried. Haverford had the petition filed. Ada Morse's letter was in hand. The telegraph had arrived by Tuesday evening, confirming Ruth Calloway's corroborating statement. Everything that could be prepared was prepared. And still, Wednesday had to be lived through, hour by hour. James spent most of it on the porch, not fixing anything, just sitting, which for James was its own kind of telling. He sat with his arms on his knees and looked at the road in the way children look at things they're afraid of, and determined not to show it. Jack sat beside him in the afternoon. They didn't talk for a while. Then James said, "What happens if they say no?" "Haverford says the evidence is strong." "That's not what I asked." Jack looked at the boy, 6 years old, and asking the question that the adults had been not asking for 2 days. "If the judge says no tomorrow," Jack said, "we appeal. We get more time. We don't stop. But in the meantime, nobody is getting in a wagon." James was quiet. "You can't promise that." "No," Jack said, "I can't. But I can tell you that Lily hasn't lost yet. And I haven't known her long, but I haven't seen her lose yet either." James thought about that. "She cried once," he said, "after Margaret died. She thought we were all asleep, but I wasn't." He said it without accusation. "She sat in the kitchen and cried for a long time. And then she stopped and she made breakfast." Jack said nothing. "I think she was crying for Margaret," James said. "But also maybe for, I don't know, for what it meant. That it was going to be just her." "It's not just her anymore," Jack said. James looked at him sideways with that measuring look. Then he looked back at the road. "No," he said. "I reckon it isn't." Thursday arrived. The courthouse in Calla Ridge was a plain building on the north end of Main Street that smelled like floor wax and old authority. Judge Whitfield was a compact man in his 60s, with a white beard and the eyes of someone who had learned to read people, the way Haverford read documents. Thoroughly, without sentimentality, looking for the truth underneath the presentation. Marsh was there with a county representative. Pratt was there, looking like a man who wished he were elsewhere. Decker was notably absent, which told Jack something about how Decker had calculated his odds. Ada Morse had come. Jack saw Lily see her the moment they walked in, saw the quick exchange between the two women, the grip of hands, the thing that passed between them that had nothing to do with the hearing and everything to do with two women who had buried someone they loved and were standing up for what she'd asked of them. Haverford was efficient and precise, and went through the evidence with the careful thoroughness of a man who respected the process and understood how to use it. Ada Morse spoke briefly and clearly, and said exactly what mattered, without elaboration. Ruth Calloway's telegraph statement was entered into record. Then Lily stood up. Haverford had advised against it. He'd said the evidence spoke for itself, that a woman speaking on her own behalf in a guardianship hearing could be read as defensive, that it was better to let the facts carry the weight. Lily had listened to all of it, and thanked him for his counsel, and stood up anyway. She said, "Judge Whitfield, I made a promise to a dying woman. I am asking this court to recognize that promise as what it was, a legal and moral commitment, witnessed by two women who are in this room, made freely and clearly by a woman who had the right to determine the future of her children." She paused. "Those children have been fed and sheltered and loved for 8 months. They know their letters and their numbers and how to set a table and say thank you. They know that James's father held a hammer a certain way.
This story was
And they know that
posted
Margaret
on the channel
Holloway
west of
loved them
Betrayal.
completely.
Please do not repost
Her
it
voice
in
was
any
steady.
form.
What they do not know is a county orphan board, and I intend to keep it that way. She sat down. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Whitfield looked at his papers. He looked at Marsh, who was examining the table in front of him. He looked at Haverford. He looked at Lily. "The household situation," Whitfield said. "Mrs. Crane, you are currently residing on Mr. Miller's property." "I am." "And the nature of that arrangement?" Haverford stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller and Mrs. Crane are engaged to be married. The household is in the process of being formalized." Whitfield looked at Jack. "Mr. Miller." Jack stood. "Yes, sir." "Is that your intention?" "It is." Whitfield looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked down at his papers. Then he picked up his pen. The scratch of it on paper was the loudest sound in the room. "Guardianship petition granted," Whitfield said. "Pending finalization of the household arrangement within 60 days, at which point the record will be updated accordingly." He looked at Marsh over the top of his papers. "The emergency provision motion is denied. The board is advised not to file another one without substantially stronger grounds." Marsh said nothing. Whitfield set down his pen and looked at Lily. "Mrs. Crane, those children are fortunate." "I am the fortunate one," Lily said. Her voice was even. She meant every word of it. Outside the courthouse, in the full white heat of a July afternoon, Ada Morse embraced Lily for a long time without saying anything, which was its own kind of eloquence. Sarah stood pressed against Lily's side, and Beth stood pressed against Sarah's, and James stood slightly apart with his chin up and his jaw set the way he did when he was feeling something too large to show. And Tommy had fallen asleep against Jack's shoulder sometime during Whitfield's ruling, and was still there, entirely unbothered by the legal proceedings that had just decided his future. Jack shifted the child's weight slightly and looked at Lily over Ada's shoulder. She looked back at him. In her face was relief so profound it had nowhere to go except to simply exist, plainly, without management or armor. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then she composed herself and pulled back from Ada and began talking logistics. Where Ada was spending the night, when she needed to leave, whether the road back to Millhaven was passable this time of year. Jack stood with Tommy asleep on his shoulder and watched her do it. James appeared at his side. "She's going to organize something now," he said. "She always organizes something when she's very happy. It's how you can tell." Jack looked down at the boy. "That's so?" "Yeah." James watched Lily with an expression that was entirely unguarded for once. Unguarded and full of a love so plain and uncomplicated that it was almost hard to look at directly. "She did the same thing the day we left Millhaven. Organized all our things for an hour before we left. Wouldn't stop moving." Jack looked back at Lily. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. Ada Morse left the next morning, and the house felt different after she was gone.
This story was posted
Not
on the
empty.
channel west of
It was
Betrayal.
never empty anymore,
Please do not
which was
repost
still
it
something
in
Jack
any
was
form.
adjusting to. But quieter, in the way that follows a significant thing. The hearing was over. The paper was signed. The crisis that had been pressing on all of them for 10 days had broken like Tommy's fever, and what was left in its wake was that particular stillness that comes when people realize they now have to figure out what comes next. Lily organized the kitchen for 45 minutes. Jack watched her do it from the doorway, remembering what James had said on the courthouse steps. She moved things from one shelf to another with the focused energy of someone whose mind was working 3 problems ahead of her hands. She wasn't fixing anything that was broken. She was just moving, the way she needed to when something inside her was too large to sit still with. "You can stop," Jack said. "It's over." "I know it's over."
She moved the flour tin 6 inches to the left. I'm reorganizing. You organized it on day 2. I'm reorganizing. He was quiet for a moment. Lily. She stopped, both hands on the flour tin.
She didn't turn around immediately, but he could see her shoulders, the way they rose slightly, then fell on a breath. She turned. It's over, he said again, gently this time. They're yours. The court said so. She looked at him with those dark eyes, and for the second time since he'd known her, her face was entirely without armor. Not for long, it never was, but long enough. I know, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I keep waiting for something else to happen. Something else to go wrong. She set down the flour tin. 8 months of something always going wrong. I know. I don't know how to stop bracing for it. Jack crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him slightly, and said, Nothing is going wrong today. She looked at him steadily. You can't promise that either. No, he said, but I can tell you that if something does, we'll handle it the same way we handled the last 10 things. He held her gaze. Together. The word sat between them. She let it. Then Beth appeared in the doorway, looked at both of them, and said with her customary 4-year-old precision, James is teaching Tommy to spit. Lily closed her eyes briefly. Of course he is. Tommy's not very good at it yet. Of course he isn't. Jack was already at the back door. I'll handle it. You absolutely will not teach that child to spit better, Lily called after him. From the yard came the sound of James demonstrating technique with great enthusiasm, and Tommy dissolving into laughter. Jack stood on the back step and watched the two of them and felt something move through his chest. Warm and unhurried and entirely unfamiliar. And he did not push it away this time. He just let it be there. The 60 days before the marriage requirement passed faster than Jack had expected and slower than he wanted, which was its own kind of information about the state of things. There was no shortage of work. The farm had been running lean for 2 seasons, and the presence of 5 additional mouths, 4 of them children, who ate with the focused commitment of people who had learned not to take meals for granted, meant the operation needed expanding. Jack put in longer hours at the fence line and the cattle pen. James was beside him for most of it, learning faster than any child had a right to, and asking questions that were sometimes impossibly precise, and sometimes entirely sideways, and always worth answering. Sarah had taken over the kitchen garden with a thoroughness that Lily called admirable, and Jack privately thought bordered on military strategy. She'd mapped it on a piece of paper and presented the plan at breakfast one morning, pointing out 3 sections that weren't getting enough water and 2 that were overcrowded, and asking Jack if he had extra steaks. He'd shown her where the steaks were kept, and gone back to his coffee and listened to her explaining irrigation logic to Beth, who was listening with the same solemn attention she gave everything. Tommy continued to talk to the horse, whose name was Dutch, and who had previously shown minimal interest in human communication, had apparently developed an opinion about this. He now came to the fence when Tommy appeared, which Jack observed without comment, and which James found hilarious, and which Lily said was probably fine as long as nobody let Tommy into the stall unsupervised. He'll be fine, Jack said. He put a frog in James's boot, Lily said. That was weeks ago. Frogs do not expire as evidence of character. Jack looked at her. She was trying not to smile and losing. He let himself look at her for a moment longer than he needed to. This woman who argued about frogs with legal precision and organized kitchens when she was overwhelmed, and stood on porches in the early morning without needing to fill the silence.
This
And then
story
he
was
looked back at
posted
his
on the
coffee.
channel west of Betrayal.
Fair
Please
point,
do not
he
repost
said.
it in any form.
3 weeks after the hearing, Roy Decker rode up the road. Jack was at the barn when he heard the hoofbeats and came out to see. Decker was alone. He rode slowly, without the particular purposefulness of a man on business, and he stopped outside the gate and didn't come in. He held his hat in his hands instead of his head, which was already a different thing from every other time Jack had seen him. Jack walked to the gate. "Jack," Decker said. "Roy?" Decker looked past him briefly toward the house, then back. "I wanted to say—" He stopped. Started again. "My wife told me I should come, after the hearing." He turned his hat in his hands. "And she was right." "Which she usually is." Jack waited. "I shouldn't have sent Pratt on them," Decker said. "I told myself it was about propriety, I told myself I was just concerned, but—" He looked at the gatepost. "Truth is, I didn't like the way you looked at her that first night I came. I didn't like that she'd gotten here and settled in, and I hadn't. I don't have a good reason for it. There wasn't one." He met Jack's eyes. "I'm sorry." Jack looked at him for a moment. He thought about Tommy's fever and the night they'd all stayed awake. He thought about Lily on the porch in the early morning before Marsh and Pratt and the whole machinery of someone else's small-mindedness arrived to make the day hard. He thought about 10 days that should have been simple. "Don't tell me," Jack said. "Tell her." Decker blinked. She's the one who walked 11 miles with 4 children and had to stand up in a courthouse and prove she deserved them." Jack held the gate. "Go tell her." Decker looked deeply uncomfortable. "I don't know that she'll want to hear it." "Probably not," Jack agreed. "But that's not really the point of an apology, is it?" After a moment, Decker got down from his horse and came through the gate. Lily came to the front door when she heard them on the porch. She looked at Decker with an expression that was entirely neutral. Not cold, not warm, simply waiting. Decker took off his hat and said what he'd said to Jack, less smoothly but more genuinely. And Lily listened, with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes on his face. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Decker," she said, "I have 4 children and a farm, and 60 days to get legally married, in and about 17 things that need doing before supper. I don't have time to carry a grudge." She looked at him steadily. "Don't do it again." "No, ma'am," Decker said. "Good." She looked at Jack. "See if Mr. Decker wants coffee before he goes." She went back inside. Decker looked at Jack. "She's something," he said. "Yes," Jack said. "She is." The wedding was on a Saturday in late August, 4 days before the 60-day deadline. Jack had offered the full 60 days. He'd said it clearly, no pressure, they had time. Lily had looked at him and said she didn't see the point in waiting when the thing was already decided. And besides, August was better than September.
This
because
story
the
was
light
posted
different,
on the channel
and
west
she had
of
ideas
Betrayal.
about the porch.
Please do not repost it in any
He had
form.
learned not to argue about the porch. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony in the front room, which Lily had arranged with the vases of dried wildflowers that Sarah and Beth had collected over 2 weeks, with what Jack now recognized as premeditated efficiency. James stood at Jack's side with his jaws set and his chin up, which was the same expression he wore for everything important. Tommy stood at Lily's side for approximately the first 4 minutes before deciding to investigate the Reverend's coat pocket, which contained nothing of interest, but produced a delay and a look from Lily that froze Tommy in place with the thoroughness of a hard winter. Ada Morse was there. She'd come back from Millhaven, which was 11 miles, which Jack noted privately. Ruth Calloway had sent a letter that Lily read twice and folded carefully into her dress pocket, and didn't mention, but also didn't put down. They stood in front of Reverend Mills and said what needed to be said. Jack said it looking at Lily's face. She said it, looking at his. Her voice was steady throughout, which did not surprise him. Her hands, when he took them, were not. Just slightly. Just enough that he felt it. Just enough that she knew he felt it, and held on anyway. When it was done, Beth tugged on Jack's sleeve. He crouched down. "Are you our pa now?" she asked. The question landed somewhere directly in the center of his chest. He held the small girl's serious gaze and thought about a man who had lived alone for 6 years, and told himself the silence was what he wanted. "If you want me to be," he said. Beth considered this with her characteristic thoroughness. Then she nodded. "Okay," she said, and walked away to find Sarah, already done with the conversation, the matter entirely resolved. Jack stayed crouched for a moment. Lily touched his shoulder, just briefly, just the weight of her hand, the particular warmth of it, and he stood up. "She'll tell you if she changes her mind," Lily said. "I know." He looked at her. "Somehow that makes it better." The summer moved into its last weeks. The garden Sarah had mapped and managed came up better than the 2 seasons before it. Enough to put up stores for winter. Enough that Jack stood at the fence, looking at rows of green, and felt something adjacent to hope, which was different from what he'd been feeling in this yard for a while. The cattle were looking better. The fence line was done, partly because Jack had worked it hard, and partly because James had, over 2 months, become an actual and genuine help, rather than an enthusiastic one. James turned 7 in September. Lily made a cake. She did it the way she did everything, with full commitment and no ceremony, presenting it at supper without announcement. And James looked at it, and then at her, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded Jack had ever seen him. Not the 7-year-old trying to be older than he was. Just a child who had been surprised by something good. "Chocolate?" James said. "What other kind is there?" Lily said. James looked at the cake for another moment. Then he looked at Jack. Then, very deliberately, he said, "Pa, can I have the first piece?" The kitchen went quiet the way kitchens go quiet when something just changed. Jack held the boy's gaze. He kept his voice level. "You can have the biggest piece," he said. James nodded, just once. Then he looked at the cake again, and a grin broke through the carefully maintained composure, wide and sudden and entirely 7 years old, and he said, "Sarah, I'm getting the biggest piece." "You are not," Pa said. The argument that followed was immediate, loud, and deeply normal, and Jack sat at the head of his table and listened to it, and did not try to hide the fact that he was smiling. Lily caught his eye across the table. She didn't smile back, not quite, but her face was entirely open, in that way it was sometimes, in the evenings, when the children were occupied and the house was full, and she wasn't managing anything, just existing inside the life they'd built. That look was its own kind of answer to a question he'd been asking himself for 34 years without knowing it. It was the morning of the first real cool day of fall when the letter came. Jack brought it in from the post-rider and set it on the table and looked at the return address, Millhaven County Court. He didn't open it. He went and found Lily. She was in the back room helping Tommy with letters. The boy had decided that morning he was ready to learn to read and had announced this fact to the household at breakfast, with the certainty of someone who had made a unilateral decision about the universe. "Letter," Jack said, "from Millhaven." Lily looked up. She lifted Tommy off her lap. "Keep practicing that A," and stood. She took the letter. She didn't open it immediately. She held it for a moment with both hands, and Jack watched her face go through something quiet and complicated. The reflex, the old bracing, the waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Then she opened it.
She read it once, then again. "It's the final record," she said. Her voice was not quite even. "From the Millhaven court. The children's guardianship formally transferred." She looked up. "It's done. All of it. It's done." Jack said nothing. She looked at the paper again, then set it down on the dresser. Not carefully, not with the deliberate placement she used for things that mattered, but the way you set something down when your hands need to be free. She stood with her back to him for a moment. He heard the breath she took. He crossed the room and stood behind her and put his hands on her shoulders, and she turned into him with a complete, unguarded motion of someone who had stopped bracing, finally, for the first time in 8 months. She didn't cry. She just stood there with her face against his shoulder and her hands gripping his shirt, and breathed, and he held on. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. They stood there until Tommy appeared in the doorway, looked at both of them with the assessment of a 3-year-old evaluating a situation, and said, "Is this a hugging thing or a sad thing?" Lily pulled back. She looked at Tommy with wet eyes and the steady face and said, "It's a good thing." "Okay." Tommy held up his paper. "I did the A. It looks bad." "Let me see." She crossed to him and took the paper and examined the crooked letter with complete attention. "That's not bad. That's a very good start." "It's crooked." "First ones are always crooked. Do it again." Tommy went back to his paper with the focus of someone who had decided to master something and intended to do it thoroughly. Lily looked back at Jack once across the room. He looked back at her. There were no words for what that look held, for what had been built in 90 days out of a barn door left open, a woman's fever, a boy who fixed things, a small girl who sat down beside a stranger and decided he was safe, a toddler who talked to a horse, and a man who had told himself for 6 years that silence was enough. No words precise enough or large enough or simple enough. Jack Miller had found them in his barn on a July night, with nothing but a lantern and a careful heart. And he had let them stay, and they had unmade the silence entirely, and he had not lost a single thing he thought he would. He had only found what he hadn't known he was missing. And Lily Crane, who had walked 11 miles in the heat of summer with a promise she refused to break, had kept it. Not just for Margaret Holloway's children, but for herself. And for the man standing in the doorway of a room that no longer felt like storage, in a house that no longer felt like a place, to wait out the years. Some promises, kept against every odd and every obstacle, have a way of becoming the very foundation of a life. This one did. And on the Miller farm outside Calla Ridge, in the long golden tail end of the summer of 1878, that life was only just beginning.